Have you ever wondered what it truly means to live authentically? To strip away all the unnecessary layers of societal expectations and live purely according to your nature? Or to find that unwavering core within yourself that remains true, regardless of the swirling chaos of the external world? It's a question that has echoed through the ages, hasn't it? And today we're going to journey back in time to explore these very questions through the life and teachings of a truly unique individual, a man who was a philosopher, a provocateur, and in his own way, a revolutionary. Diogenes of Sinope, the Cynic. Now before we get to the man, the myth, the legend, let's set the stage, shall we? Picture ancient Greece, around the 4th century before the Common Era. This was the era of Alexander the Great's conquests, a time when the echoes of Socrates' wisdom still resonated through the bustling marketplaces and grand academies of Athens. Think of a society built on a complex hierarchy where citizenship was a privilege, slavery was commonplace, and the polis, the city-state, was the very center of life. Imagine the vibrant colors of the togas, the lively debates in the agora, the imposing temples dedicated to the gods. This is where our story begins, in a world that, in many ways, mirrors our own struggles with power, wealth, and the search for meaning. A world grappling with questions of justice, virtue, and the good life. In this vibrant yet often turbulent world emerged a philosophical movement known as Cynicism. But before you conjure up images of negativity and pessimism, let's clear something up. The word cynic back then had a very different connotation than it does today. It comes from the Greek word kynikos, meaning dog-like. And yes, you heard that right, dog-like. Now, why a dog? Was it an insult? Absolutely not. It was a reference to the cynics' unconventional lifestyle, their rejection of societal norms, and their embrace of a simple, natural way of living. Think about how a dog lives, in the present moment, free from the burdens of societal pretense, unburdened by worries about the past or future. They live authentically, guided by their instincts and needs. This is what the cynics aspired to, a life free from the artificial constraints of society. The founder of this movement was a philosopher named Antisthenes, a student of Socrates. Antisthenes championed the idea that virtue, the pursuit of moral excellence, was the ultimate goal in life. He believed that true happiness, or eudaimonia, a concept we might translate as flourishing, could only be achieved by living in accordance with nature, free from the distractions of material possessions and societal expectations. He taught that external goods, wealth, fame, power, were ultimately worthless, and that true wealth resided in one's soul. And it is through Antisthenes that we arrive at Diogenes, his most famous student, the man who would take these ideas to their most extreme and captivating limits. Diogenes was born in Sinope, a Greek colony on the coast of the Black Sea, in a region we know today as modern-day Turkey. His early life is shrouded in some mystery, but it is said that he and his father were involved in some kind of banking or money-minting scandal, resulting in their exile from Sinope. Some accounts suggest that Diogenes himself defaced the currency, a symbolic act of rebellion against the established order. This early experience with societal condemnation and the capricious nature of wealth may have played a formative role in shaping Diogenes' worldview. He saw firsthand how quickly fortunes could change and how easily society could turn against an individual. He eventually made his way to Athens, where he encountered Antisthenes and became his most devoted, albeit unconventional, student. Now, you may have heard the famous story of Diogenes living in a barrel. It wasn't exactly a barrel in the modern sense, but rather a large ceramic jar, known as a pythos. These jars were commonly used for storing food or wine. This was not just a quirky living arrangement, it was a powerful statement. It symbolized his rejection of material possessions, his embrace of simplicity, and his utter disregard for conventional notions of comfort and status. Imagine him there, in the heart of Athens, a city obsessed with wealth and status, living in a discarded storage jar. It was a radical act of defiance, a living embodiment of his philosophy. He was, quite literally, turning his back on the trappings of a society he saw as corrupt and artificial. He was choosing to live on his own terms, free from the expectations and judgments of others. Diogenes was a master of what we might call performance philosophy. His life was his philosophy in action. He used his actions, often outrageous and provocative, to challenge the norms of Athenian society. He was a living, breathing critique of the status quo. He would walk around in broad daylight with a lamp, claiming to be searching for an honest man. Picture this: Diogenes, with his lamp held high, peering into the faces of passers-by, searching for a glimmer of true virtue in a sea of pretense. It was a powerful theatrical way of exposing what he saw as the pervasive dishonesty and moral decay of his society. He would publicly mock social conventions, engaging in behaviors that were considered taboo, even performing bodily functions in public. He did all of this to expose what he saw as the hypocrisy and absurdity of a society obsessed with wealth, power, and social status, a society that had lost touch with its true nature, a society that valued appearances over substance. His actions were designed to shock people out of their complacency, to force them to question their values and their assumptions about the world. Now let us delve deeper into what I like to call the 4 pillars of Diogenes' philosophy. These pillars form the bedrock of his thought, and they are as relevant today as they were 2,400 years ago. First, we have the despise of conventional morality. Diogenes believed that most societal rules and moral codes were artificial constructs designed to control and suppress individual freedom. He saw them as chains that bound people to a life of conformity and inauthenticity. He wasn't advocating for lawlessness, but rather for a return to a more natural, instinctive way of living, guided by reason and virtue, not by arbitrary social norms. He believed that true morality stemmed from living virtuously and authentically, not from blindly following societal rules. He lived his life as he saw fit, disregarding social conventions that he deemed meaningless, challenging the very notion of what was considered proper or acceptable. He questioned everything, refusing to accept anything at face value. The second pillar is materialism, although not in the sense we typically use the word today. For Diogenes, it meant valuing only what is truly essential for survival: food, water, shelter, the basic necessities of life. He saw the pursuit of wealth and luxury as a distraction, a source of anxiety and unhappiness. It was like chasing shadows, a futile endeavor that could only lead to disappointment. He believed that by freeing ourselves from the desire for material possessions, we free ourselves from a form of slavery, the slavery to our own desires. We become masters of our own lives, rather than being controlled by our possessions. He would often ridicule those who chased after riches, arguing that they were chasing illusions, neglecting their souls for the sake of fleeting pleasures. His own life, living with minimal possessions, was a testament to this principle. He showed that true happiness did not depend on external circumstances, but on inner peace and freedom. The third pillar is skepticism of human goodness, or, let's be honest, a distrust of human goodness. Diogenes was not a wide-eyed optimist about human nature. He saw the greed, the hypocrisy, the cruelty that existed in the world, and he wasn't afraid to call it out. He believed that most people were driven by self-interest and were easily swayed by power and pleasure. He believed that true virtue was rare and that most people were sleepwalking through life unaware of their own ignorance and moral failings. This doesn't mean he hated humanity. Rather, he saw his role as a kind of philosophical gadfly, stinging people awake from their moral slumber. He challenged people to examine their lives and to strive for true virtue, even if it meant facing uncomfortable truths about themselves. He believed that self-awareness was the first step towards wisdom. His sharp wit and biting criticisms were intended to provoke self-reflection, to force people to confront their own shortcomings. Finally, we have rejection of authority. Diogenes had no patience for kings, politicians, or anyone who claimed authority based on birthright or social status. He believed that true authority came from wisdom and virtue, not from titles or power. He saw through the facade of power, recognizing that it was often based on nothing more than brute force or inherited privilege. He famously disrespected even the most powerful figures of his day, treating everyone the same, regardless of their social standing. He believed that all people were equal in their capacity for virtue, and that no one had the right to rule over another simply because of their birth or position. This pillar is perhaps best illustrated in his famous encounter with Alexander the Great, an encounter that has become a legend in itself, a timeless example of speaking truth to power. The story goes that Alexander, the young conqueror who had amassed an empire stretching from Greece to India, heard about the infamous philosopher Diogenes and decided to pay him a visit. Alexander, having heard tales of this strange and wise man, was curious. He found Diogenes sitting outside his pithos, basking in the sun, enjoying the simple pleasure of a warm day. Alexander, in all his imperial splendor, stood before Diogenes and said, "I am Alexander the Great." He expected Diogenes to be impressed, to be awestruck by his presence. Diogenes, unimpressed, simply replied, "And I am Diogenes the Cynic." He didn't bow, he didn't scrape. He simply acknowledged Alexander's statement with a statement of his own. Alexander, perhaps amused by Diogenes' audacity, then asked, "Is there anything I can do for you?" He was offering a favor, a boon, extending a gesture of generosity to this unusual man. And Diogenes, without missing a beat, responded, "Yes, you can stand out of my sunlight. Think about this for a moment. Here is one of the most powerful men in the world, offering a favor to a man who had nothing. And Diogenes' response is essentially, 'Get out of my way.' This encounter perfectly encapsulates Diogenes' rejection of authority, his commitment to living simply, and his utter fearlessness in the face of power. He needed nothing from Alexander because he already possessed everything. He valued his freedom, his reason, and his connection to nature. He valued the sunlight, a natural gift more than any favor from a king. It was a powerful statement about the nature of true wealth and the emptiness of worldly power. What could Alexander possibly offer Diogenes that he didn't already have? Diogenes also had a famous rivalry with Plato, another prominent philosopher of the time. While Plato was known for his abstract theories and his ideal forms, his realm of perfect eternal ideas, Diogenes was all about practical, lived experience. Their disagreements were not just philosophical, they were a clash of personalities and lifestyles. Plato, with his academy and his refined students, represented the established philosophical order, a world of intellectual elitism. Diogenes, with his barrel and his outrageous behavior, represented a radical challenge to that order, a voice for the common man, for authenticity over pretense. There's a famous anecdote that perfectly illustrates their philosophical differences. Plato once defined man as a featherless biped. He was trying to come up with a concise, essential definition of what it meant to be human. Diogenes, in response, plucked a chicken and brought it to Plato's academy, declaring, "Behold Plato's man." This was Diogenes' way of mocking Plato's abstract definitions, arguing that they were detached from reality. In effect, he was saying, "Your definitions are meaningless. Look at the real world." These stories, whether entirely true or embellished over time, highlight Diogenes' sharp wit, his commitment to living his philosophy, and his determination to challenge the status quo, even when that meant confronting the most respected figures of his time. He was a master of using humor and satire to expose hypocrisy and to provoke thought. He was a constant reminder that wisdom could be found not just in grand theories, but also in the simple act of living authentically. Now, what can we, living in the 21st century, learn from this ancient iconoclast? How can the ideas of a man who lived in a barrel and challenged emperors possibly be relevant to our modern lives? Well, quite a lot, actually. Diogenes' philosophy, at its core, is a call to authenticity, a challenge to examine our own lives and to question the values we have inherited from society. It's an invitation to strip away the unnecessary, to focus on what truly matters, and to live in accordance with our own reason and virtue. It's a call to define our own version of the good life, rather than blindly accepting the one that society dictates to us. In a world obsessed with consumerism, social media, and the relentless pursuit of external validation, Diogenes' message is perhaps more relevant than ever. We are constantly bombarded with messages telling us that we need more, that we need to be more successful, more attractive, more popular. We are encouraged to compare ourselves to others, to strive for an ideal that is often unattainable and ultimately unfulfilling. How many times have you found yourself scrolling through social media, feeling inadequate or envious of the seemingly perfect lives of others? Diogenes would tell us that this is all a grand illusion, a distraction from the true path to happiness. He would challenge us to look within, to cultivate our inner lives rather than chasing after external validation. Are we happier and more fulfilled than previous generations because we have more material possessions? Are we truly living authentically, or are we merely playing roles dictated to us by society? Are we living our lives based on our own values, or are we simply conforming to the expectations of others? His emphasis on self-sufficiency and freedom from material desires resonates deeply in our current age of environmental concerns and growing income inequality. He reminds us that true wealth lies not in what we possess, but in who we are, in our character, our virtue, and our connection to something larger than ourselves. It's about finding contentment in simplicity, in appreciating the natural world, in cultivating meaningful relationships. His distrust of blind obedience to authority encourages us to think critically, to question the narratives we are presented with, and to form our own informed opinions. In a world of fake news and political polarization, his emphasis on reason and independent thought is more important than ever. Of course, Diogenes' philosophy is not without its challenges. It's easy to romanticize his lifestyle, but it's important to remember that he lived in a very different time and place. We can't all go live in barrels and reject all social conventions. That's not practical, nor is it necessarily desirable. But we can learn from his core principles. We can learn to question, to challenge, to seek authenticity, and to live more intentionally. We can learn to distinguish between our true needs and the artificial desires manufactured by a consumerist society. We can strive to live more simply, to consume less, and to appreciate more. We can cultivate our inner lives, our capacity for reason and virtue, and strive to live in accordance with our values. The paradox of freedom, as Diogenes might have seen it, and as later echoed by philosophers like Immanuel Kant, is that true. Freedom isn't just about doing whatever you want. It's about mastering your desires, about living according to reason and virtue, rather than being enslaved by your impulses. It's about choosing to do what is right, even when it's difficult, even when it goes against the grain of societal expectations. It's about recognizing that true happiness comes not from external circumstances, but from within, from the cultivation of a virtuous character. It's about understanding that we are not just passive recipients of experience, but active agents who can shape our own lives and destinies. So as we leave Diogenes there, basking in the Athenian sun, let's carry his spirit of inquiry, his courage, and his commitment to authenticity with us. Let's ask ourselves, what does it mean to live a good life? What truly matters? And are we brave enough to live according to our own answers, even if it means standing out of someone else's sunlight? Even if it means challenging the status quo and forging our own path? Diogenes' life is a powerful reminder that the search for meaning and happiness is an ongoing journey, a journey that requires us to question, to challenge, and ultimately to define our own path. It's a journey that begins not with acquiring more, but with understanding ourselves more deeply. It is in this understanding, this courageous self-examination, that we, like Diogenes, might just find our own unique way to shine. And perhaps, just perhaps, we will discover that the true measure of a life well lived is not in the length of our days, but in the depth of our authenticity, in the courage to be true to ourselves, no matter the cost. The journey may be challenging, but the reward, a life lived truly and fully, is worth more than any amount of gold or glory. For in the end, it is not what we have that defines us, but who we are and the choices we make. Choose to be authentic. Choose to be true. Choose to be you.